right, on this episode of Content is Foreclosure, we have a very special episode. I'm wearing my Sun's Out, Guns Out shirt. If you're not watching on YouTube, you're
I can't
missing out.
handle it.
And the reason for all of that is we're at my Dream Team hat on. The reason for that is that Carlton and I just got back from the Mid America Trucking Show in Louisville, Kentucky. We're going to tell you everything we saw, everything we heard, some crazy things we saw and heard, and most importantly, the takeaways that we learned. Let's get into it. Carlton, thank you
We're
for
back.
surviving the journey to Louisville with me. Thank you for
I
going.
mean, talking about surviving, Adam, you were the one that survived.
Yeah, it was
Adam
a
was like on
rough
death's
week.
doorstep with a sinus infection.
We actually, full disclosure, we recorded an episode in Louisville, at Louisville, whatever that city is called,
Louisville.
uh, and it was a bad week for me all around. We'll get into some details of it, but I had just nothing worked out for me, and including the fact that I was pretty sick. And Carlton took one glance at the video and was like, "Oh yeah, we can't use this. You look horrendous." So I'm wearing this
I think your
instead.
content was good. It was just people would have written in and just stopped the video out of concern for your health.
Yeah,
So
yeah, it was a rough look, but we did make it. So we were there for the Mid American Trucking Show, which is one of, if not the biggest, trucking show I think in the country. So some of the details, I think they said there were 50,000 truckers who had registered to come. There was how many exhibitors do you think were there? I mean,
yeah, I don't know the actual numbers, but if their booth things meant anything, there had to be a few thousand.
a few thousand. Yeah, I mean that tracks with how big everything was. And the entire point of the show is to both provide like new solutions, new opportunities, new jobs, new products for truckers themselves. So it wasn't necessarily like a supply chain show broadly, but specific to trucking. It's one of the biggest or the biggest show. We had a client there, and so we got media passes, which was great. Thank you to Mid America Trucking Show for allowing us to have those. And we were there for a couple of reasons. We were helping our client, supporting our client, Oakley Trucking. Thank you again to all of them who allowed us to tag along. We also made and are making a short, I don't know what you'd call it, just kind of a short YouTube video on the future of the driving experience,
A vignette.
a vignette, and had a lot of really great conversations with different companies in the space about that and around that. We'll talk about that, and then we were there just kind of observing and seeing what there was to see. So Carlton, maybe a couple, like, just lay the context for the people, couple highlights contextually of what you saw last week.
Yeah, first of all, I should have came prepared for this interview and wore my fake mullet
That's why I
because
have
we
this on,
saw it was it was the land of the mullets, man.
big time.
Uh, yeah, there's like another acronym for mats. I feel like we could come up with something good. Um, so yeah, it was a trucker show focused on truckers
Mullets at the
specifically.
show. Sorry,
There you go.
mullets at the show.
That's
All right,
it.
continue.
That's it right there. Mullets at the show. Nice and simple. We basically in talking to people figured out that um well, the trucking industry in and of itself has a lot of hardware components to it because you're driving a truck, right?
Hmm.
And then, increasingly there's a lot more software components. So you go by these booths, and sometimes the services were obvious, what they did, whether it was they got the grill for the truck, and this is a booth that specializes in grills, or you could see some screens up, and it was kind of clear from other booths that they were technology booths, or that
Right.
they had something to do with services specific to the driver industry. um so yeah, as far as the entire show goes, there was a very, very large variety of different types of vendors there. And as far as truckers go, I think what they were looking to get, a lot of them, in talking to these different people, there was the industries or the companies that were looking to attract drivers, and then there was some there that were, you could tell solely looking to attract maybe the company that would employ the drivers. So maybe
Hmm.
not necessarily owner operators, but um, companies like Oakley or like Norton. So you got this huge mixed bag of um, different levels of the trucking industry and different, I guess you'd say, different roles within that. And so it was super interesting for us to just be able to talk to these different people and really walk away getting pretty much a similar synopsis from everyone.
Hmm.
And that was really that the trucking industry at large is going through a ton of change right now.
Right.
Drivers have the leverage. They've got the negotiating leverage because of the shortage right now. And so that's a big concern that everyone is focused on is finding drivers. But really what it
The
represented is this.
workforce shortage, to be
Yeah,
clear.
the
Yeah.
workforce force shorter. So drivers, people trying to hire left and right. So within that, though, I think we kind of walked away thinking and understanding that there's a little bit of a gap between um, where technology is going and where the trucking industry is going for drivers. And sometimes
Yeah.
these drivers, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna add a couple things. I think that front loading to what you just said, it's the same problems, right? Because I think some people who might be listening to this who maybe are part of the industry are like, well, actually, we're coming out of that shortage to the point where I think the spot markets are down right now. Trucking companies are having to take loads that they wouldn't have taken, 6, 9, 12, 18 months ago. So the market is sort of changing, but when it comes to the actual talent, the workforce, just like blue collar jobs all across America, truckers maybe more so. And this has been the news. This is not novel to anyone, but they there is a huge shortage there, and they can kind of dictate their own terms. And it's this weird balancing act. I want to get to the problems in a second. Where just a few things about truckers. If you're not familiar with truckers, probably most of you are. There's a few things that I think are unique about them that are worth noting. So, one, first of all, it is still considered very much a blue collar job, right? You can go into trucking with or without any type of really formal education. We met lots of truckers who had the height of their education was a GED or a high school diploma, and they're doing great. Like they're making over three hundred
Killing it.
thousand dollars. They're taking home whatever 250 of that. They're making more money than they ever have before. So that's a unique thing, I would say, to trucking, where the education level doesn't necessarily have to be as high as other industries to have that earning potential, and that earning potential is real. The other thing is that there is and this is from you, I learned this, Carlton, or noticed this. There's just a general mistrust because of what's gone on in the last 12 to 18 to 24 months, in really just entirely across the country, but specifically as it relates to truckers. And you could feel that just in conversations, in talking to both the vendors and the truckers. There's a sense of a little bit of a sense of mistrust on behalf of the truckers, of like, I have to take care of myself. No one else is going to look out for me. And everyone's in fact probably out to get me. And the reason that they believe that, all the other like geopolitical stuff aside, is because of this sort of elephant in the room that's hanging out behind everyone's head, that is driverless technology and driverless trucking having no drivers, right? Robot drivers, whatever. And funnily enough, funnily, I don't know if it's a word. Um, Funnel cakes enough. It
The
That came
Yeah.
up with a bunch of vendors who were like more. I don't. I'd be curious to get your take on that. But before we get into fully into the problems, just laying the landscape for people. I thought there was some vendors there and some people who were just there as part of the whatever, not truckers, part of the crowd, who were a lot more light about that. Like, yeah, we got to get these guys to work with us or to do this or blah blah blah. At least until we can replace them with robots. And like that was like a pretty common refrain. And it's like, well, no wonder they hate you, because
Yeah.
that there's like a divide there. Did you notice that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely it almost feels when you're there like a class divide.
Yeah,
Um, but really it's just lifestyle, right? It's a
right.
difference in what people have as their ideals. I think from the technology perspective, a lot of these drivers or some of the drivers view the technology that they have to do as a burden. It's
Mm,
like, oh, I've got to do that thing, and I've got to do this thing, and I've got to have this app and that app. I think a lot of them gladly will adopt technology that helps them. But I think the most recent changes in the driving industry, for the most part, have been things that have limited or hindered what they can do,
mhm.
instead of enabling them.
So
And so,
give us an example from something you saw.
yeah, so like example with their logs. That's been something that's not super recent, but you've got basically these computers inside trucks now that are monitoring everything.
Mhm,
Um, and those logs will, they physically can't drive their truck longer than a certain amount of time before, they it's registered. Um, that's one aspect of it, and I think the other aspect of it is that you have, um, you've got different companies that are trying to get their foot in the door with their technology and
mhm,
trying to optimize things for them, and the trucker is just one part of that. And so one thing that I kept looking for was which companies or how are companies trying to bring those different things together,
mm.
those different pieces of technology to actually make it easier on the driver instead of one more thing that the driver has to keep track of or one more app that they have to download. And to be honest, I mean, we didn't talk to every single person there, but I didn't see as much of that as I thought. I
And
saw a lot
what
of
you're talking about
companies.
there is like it to relate it to technology is like the who's building the APIs or right?
Absolutely, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Who's building the connections, so that things will work together seamlessly.
yeah.
And it's I think you see it a lot in different industries. It's not only the trucking vertical, but you see it where people will try. Yeah, it's silos. They try to build it all. They try to,
Mhm.
basically have their own ecosystem with everything in it. And so I think it'll be interesting to see where things go, as far as data being shared, as far as platforms working, with each other in a way that helps not just the driver, but also the companies that are deploying the technology.
Yeah. Okay, so just to recap, I think we laid out four problems there. The first is kind of general driver mistrust, and I think totally three problems maybe, because that goes along with there's a view of drivers as a commodity by the other side. These are not right or wrong. I'm just stating what we saw. The second is like you just mentioned, like there's a lot of investment being poured into this, obviously, um, but everyone's fighting their own battle independently, and there doesn't seem to be a ton of cross collaboration. And of course, this is our view from the trade show floor, right? Like we're not privy to what's going on behind doors, but that's what it seems like. And the next one I would say is there seems to be a lot of short term thinking when it comes to um, uh, like driver engagement and whatever we offer of value we can give to drivers. What I mean by that is this: we were there with Oakley Trucking, who is the antithesis of this, and who just in standing there and seeing the conversations they were having, the fact that it seemed so novel to these drivers that Oakley has had people with them who have been there for 10 or 15 years and who have been taken care of by the company. And like drivers were blown away by that. But we kept meeting driver after driver who had actually experienced that. And to me, it was like, I wonder why that is, because they do it. Um, and then we walked around, and there's even a part of the trade show floor called the Shark Tank, and or that's what everyone refers to it as. And it's just like, if you've watched like a Wall Street movie or something like that, and there's like a trading floor and everyone's just yelling and blah blah blah. That's kind of the feel you get, but like on a trucker trade show environment. So got everyone's just walking through, and people are just like hitting them upside the head with, "Hey, come drive for this rate per mile. Hey, come, not even pretending to like have a value offer necessarily, like Oakley did. So Oakley had a whole setup and did really well. But I'm talking about these other groups that it was just like, here's our table, here's our card, do you want to sign up or not? And both from the driver's point of view of like just being bombarded with all these messages and I guess opportunities, but also from like the people who like people were accepting those opportunities and taking those jobs and et cetera. And it's like, man, that just seems like such short term thinking by both sides instead of investing in maybe like a knowledge base or in things to help these folks over the next 15 years if there is a transition in the workforce. It was none of that. It was like, where can I get the 15 cents per mile more? And that just
Yeah.
struck me because it was so different than I think some of the other industries that we've
Yeah, so it's an
experienced.
interesting thread to pull on there because talking to some people, you get the sense that loyalty is everything. Like some of these truckers that you talk to, it's like they are only going to drive for that one company, and that's you could almost put them in their own category
Hmm.
as far as owner operators go. I think you've got people that they're an owner operator and they're on the other side of the spectrum where they are just going to move companies for the 15-cent increase or whatever it is.
Hmm.
And you're talking about that commoditization element. It's almost like some of these truckers, they want to see as many options as they can to be able to pick the best one.
Hmm.
And I think what we're talking about is when you're trying to attract drivers to actually stick with your company from the company's perspective, you need to do things that are more than just commoditizing them.
Hmm.
You need to build the relationship and make it so that there is shared trust there and shared experiences around a knowledge base, like you were saying, Adam, or something similar to that. Whether that's a company party or there could be a bunch of
I mean,
different
I
things
think
that these drivers.
content's a
Yeah,
great example
content.
of that, right? Like,
Absolutely.
I'm not going to continue. This is not like a paid for by Oakley, but they just do it so well that I feel like I need to reference them. But we saw so Oakley Trucking, customer of ours, produces the Oakley Trucking podcast. That is a podcast targeted to 800 people, the 800 owner operators who work for Oakley. And first of all, we know the numbers, so we know a lot more people are listening to it than their intended audience. But also, we kept seeing different people who would just walk up who have never worked with Oakley or some who weren't drivers, but who listened to the show and were like, wow, you all do something different here. Or you all really have changed the way I think about XYZ in my business. Or, we met the one family who they rent a truck, I think, but the father and daughter and wife were there, and they just wanted to say hey to Jeremy because like it's part of their almost like regular content diet. And I think that's a cool example of very long term thinking, but that was the minority for the most part.
Yeah, I think we saw 3, podcast setups
Right.
while we were there. There are people that were doing at the show. I'm sure more people than just that have it.
Hmm.
But, as far as, running it live at the event, because it's a perfect opportunity to meet up with people that are already in your space, industry leaders, with a lot of expertise. And I think what you said earlier was good, Adam. We're not necessarily trucking and logistics experts.
Yeah,
This is just our marketing lens kind of being applied
just
to,
observing. Yeah.
yeah, over a 3-day span and kind of observing what we notice.
Okay, so let's flip. I think that's a good synopsis of the problems: mistrust, siloed solutions, a lot of short-term thinking when it comes to the driver experience. What are some of the solutions that either you saw or just like were interesting to you as we walked away from it, or interesting to think about?
Yeah, I think as far as technology goes, because that's where my head mainly was just looking at, what are the opportunities here? What are the biggest problems here? I do think like driver monitoring and I guess it's like truck and driver monitoring, road monitoring. But that whole idea of having a cameras on the truck or cameras in the cab to kind of keep track of everything is really interesting.
Hmm.
Uh, because you've got these computers that are inside the truck engine, and those are saying some of the, they're connected to the engine, they're connected to the basically to the road, saying what's happening there. But then adding another layer on top of it that's like this camera on the road and camera in the cab, it seems a little bit big brother-ish, right? So I was just kind of curious to see how different companies were trying to, you know, put their own spin on that. And one of the companies we talked to basically used that to gamify and to make things a little bit more of a carrot, as they
Hmm.
say, instead of a stick, and try to entice these drivers to have improved driving, not just have better driving, but also do, basically some of the things that would make um, would help their company, but also help the driver improve. And so there's this green zone score, and they could get in that green zone score if they had so many miles that were, incident free. And so it just incentivized them to be better drivers. So I thought that was interesting from a technology perspective.
Hmm.
What about you, Adam? What did you think?
Yeah, well, just on that, I think that was Netrodyne. I mispronounced them before, but was that what they were called?
Yeah, Nine.
Netrodyne, yeah. I think the other thing that I really liked about them was that's another great example of the really long-term focus. They have a whole portal of educational content where they're trying to actually improve the driver as a driver, not necessarily just as a meat body that that will soon be replaced by a robot. Um, so yeah, that's a good example. One that I think we saw that being in full transparency, neither of us was like impressed at the actual booth, but the idea I think is interesting. So we saw this one company. I don't know what they're called. I wouldn't after that intro. I wouldn't say it anyways. But it was some type of virtual reality training company, and the idea behind it was they were using the what's it called, the
Headset. Yeah,
yeah,
VR headset.
VR headset in order to so theirs was remedial. But so like if a driver had done something wrong or had a mark against them, then you could come replicate that scenario using the VR goggles and try to help them how to try to train them to do better next time. I thought that was cool. I thought even better is like putting drivers into like flight simulator school. If you're going through the process and you maybe have driven some or are about to start driving, putting them into some of the scenarios that they are just going to face, particularly like by region. With the trucking companies that we work with, their drivers tend to have a similar route or routes that they stick with. So like if you're going to be going over the Rockies, okay, well that sets a certain set of challenges. If you're going to be in the
Yeah,
Northeast during the
you have to deal
winter,
with snow.
yeah, yeah, hurricane, like whatever heavy wind, like you're going to deal with a certain set of circumstances by your geography. Um, so anyway, they weren't doing that, but that's just where my head went of like very personalized, very specific training. Because the VR stuff was really really cool, and I think it could be applied to again help proactively give and fill up the driver as opposed to just like the short term thinking. But I thought that was one, and then the other one, and we did an interview with a group. I don't know if you have the name there, but the other one that just really stuck out to me, and this is just like a problem. I know this is a much bigger problem than anything we can solve, definitely on a podcast, but
With
just
content.
yeah, just with content. But the problem of driver health and the huge opportunity for technology solutions there. When we talk about driver experience, like they are human beings who are sitting for 10, 12, 14 hours a day. The average age, we were told this week, the average lifespan of a driver is 57. That's insane.
So I understood that as the actual lifespan. Do you think that that was the career span?
Now that would be crazy because that would be way longer than any other career span. I'm pretty sure that was
Okay.
like,
Yeah,
biological
I mean,
life.
I couldn't. I know he said 57, but I was like, oh my word, that's insane. If that's the case,
Yeah,
but I would almost believe it with some of the things that we saw. So
yeah, yeah. It was really sad to see, and not by no fault of the driver, right? Like you and I were in that arena for 3 days. We weren't even in a truck the entire time, and we made the worst food choices because because of where we were. I came home feeling terrible. So I think there's a lot of education that needs to go on there. I wish there was some enablement, some health enablement, like simple truckers driver specific workout apps and workout videos that can help them use the equipment that is around them organically to make better decisions or to be able to get their heart rate up, or I'm talking about in a very rudimentary way, but that was like something that
Yeah.
like slapped me in the face.
Yeah, it was the one, company called Healthy Trucking.
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
that was what it called, Truckee Healthing. Um, Healthy Trucking, and they were a nonprofit, and they're working with the CDC, and I think it was interesting to see some of their initiatives because they're literally giving away tons of resources and tests and different things. But I think for that particular agency, it goes back to that trust thing, right? Like
Hmm.
there's this layer of mistrust for certain agencies or certain um,
Yeah,
you know
government entity. I mean,
yeah,
specifically with the
government
trucker
entities.
audience. Yeah, it's
So, I think that's a problem to be solved. And like you said, it's not just like we can't just solve it with content, but I think content can play a role in
hmm.
informing them. We did see the yoga. There's like two
Oh yeah,
yoga
you're right.
companies
I
there.
hope. Yeah, I forgot about that one.
So there was some there, but I think that's right. It's an opportunity until it's a solved problem, right?
Hmm.
So I think it's a space that could definitely um, use a lot of attention. I think for us being involved with Dynamo and some of these other companies in the trucking space or in the logistics space, where we get to see some of the advanced, kind of like the future of trucking, future
Yeah.
of supply chain. I think we're exposed to some solutions that are pretty far in advance, but there's
Hmm.
this gap between maybe the next 5 and 10 years where there's definitely going to still be a person in the truck, and they're definitely going to still have some of the challenges that we're dealing with today.
Hmm.
Um, where I think it's valid for companies to be solving for those too, and we saw a lot of that at the trucking show. It's just hard to know how many of these companies are supported just by the driver themselves, this owner operator, and how many companies can this owner operator afford to pay. And if there are choices between leveraging a couple more, getting a little bit more money out of whatever route they're taking versus spending a bunch of money on a health solution, they're probably going to
Yeah,
take that
you're
that
right.
money. So it's just something to think about, where how can you integrate that problem with another solution that maybe solves multiple problems at once.
Yeah, I would say maybe moving from those solutions to maybe some broader takeaways. I think what you just were talking about is probably the first one for me. Is that yes, we don't have all the looks under the veil, but if you just take the temperature of what we saw over 1,000 exhibitors. I think it's very safe to say we saw 50,000 plus attendees. Um, you just take the temperature of the room. It felt the driver experience. Now I'm not talking about the entire industry, but the driver experience feels super antiquated. Like I think that's just fair to say. There's plenty of room for innovation and plenty of room for where content can play a role in enabling these people. That's just a broad thing that I think is true. The second thing I'd say is that I think most of the problems and solutions that we're kind of talking about now can also be extrapolated. Like I'm thinking of some of our listeners who aren't in the trucking business, but do have blue collar or whatever you want to call it, sweaty startup type employees. And I think these are probably a similar problem set for. Why are you laughing at me? What?
I just the sweaty startup. Unless you know the sweaty startup guy, it probably just sounds like an insult.
Oh,
But
okay. Sweaty startup just means that you are doing something that's, you're not
yeah,
sitting at a computer all day.
hard work. Yeah,
Sully knows. I'm thinking of Sully. So, like, he knows what I'm
yeah,
talking about.
right.
These are the same problem sets across those industries. I think like the difference is, and this is why trucking is so intriguing, and this is like my opportunistic sense now, is that not all of those industries are people pulling down 270, 300,000. You know what I mean? So like this
Yeah,
is this unique area where the driver experience, they have capital to spend on, especially on like what do people do just across human nature when you start to make money? What do you do with that money? Like what are some of the things, it's Maslow's hierarchy, right? Like you solve for what you need, and then as your needs change, you change with them. So I think that is a huge market opportunity, to just help drivers sort of nudge their way up Maslow's hierarchy. And I mean that in the most positive way. That probably sounds super capitalistic, but I just mean that in the most positive way of like making their lives better so that they're not making $300,000, but eating, sodium and plastic until they pass away in their mid 50s. Like that just is crazy to me.
Yeah. I think another takeaway is that speaking back to the trust element, there's I think there's a certain amount of money or advertising that gets put into trying to like almost like whitewash um, some of the negatives of some of these programs or some of these companies,
Mm.
and I think a lot of truckers see right through that. Like you try to make it look pretty or try to do something so it doesn't seem so much like Big Brother, watching your,
Oh, yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah. Just be
like
transparent, you're saying.
yeah, and I think there's something to be said for being transparent. And I loved
Yeah.
what Nextradine said or Netradine said about this because until you give them the ability to see the exact same data that that company sees, that that trucking business sees, and until you give them the opportunity to make comments or to give feedback on that, then you don't have the trust.
Yeah.
I think that those things go hand in hand. So it's interesting to see like how can you take an industry that has some of uh, those leanings towards or tend to be less technologically inclined and give them the resources and give them the opportunities to use that technology but in a transparent way,
Hmm.
and not make it just so it's like, well, this is happening above your head or over your head, but this is something that if you can help us with or if you can partake in or if you can participate in, then it will help us both.
Yeah, I think that
So
totally speaks to the commoditization again, right? Like, oh, these
yeah,
drivers are just like they'll just do what we think, and I mean,
yeah.
and it's just like a completely misunderstanding who your audience is. Totally agree with you.
So I think that's my big takeaway. Hopefully that's not too abstract, but it's definitely something you could experience and see when you were there.
Yeah. Yeah, well, all in all, really enjoyed the trip, enjoyed the conference. I think it's something that we'll probably end up doing again and again, just because we learned so much. We were able to make some great connections. But one story, maybe to wrap up this.
The highlight of Adam's trip.
No, it was terrible. I've already told you I was kind of sick. I was trying to tough through it or whatever. We're driving down to dinner, Carlton and I, and we're driving in my vehicle, and Carlton would say I'm probably like a little bit obsessive, but I am like pretty particular when it comes to my vehicle. So like if there's a chance to park further and have no one be close
Yeah.
to me so that I
We're literally walking for like 30 minutes because
don't
Adam didn't want to park within a mile of another car.
listen.
We're gonna go into a restaurant. He's like, no, just not. We can't. It's just you have to park too close to another
I was
car.
looking out for our health per our trucking conversation we just had. But anyway, I am particular about it, and I think maybe that's what it was. It's just like idolatry that I was being punished. But
Yeah.
we're driving down towards downtown, and I see this man like gesturing on the side of the road, and we passed him, and then all of a sudden I heard like a huge boom, and Carlton's like, "Whoa, that guy just threw something at us," and I was like, "What?" I pull over. This man had thrown some type of, we still don't know what it was, like a cement
Yeah. The jury's out on this one.
mud ball of some kind
There was
that,
sand residue on the side of your truck, and it was lightly scratched.
yeah, like
But it
it.
was soft enough that I saw something kind of explode
Oh, right, you
out of the
saw
corner
it.
of my mirror.
And also, like, it didn't like dent the truck like a
Yeah,
rock would have or something like that.
yeah,
Uh, and so anyway, I was obsessed with it. I checked that spot probably 10 times that evening and the next day. Did get it home, did get it cleaned up. For the most part, it's gone. There's some remaining scratches that I'll never be happy about. But that was our welcome to Louisville. So if anyone from Louisville is listening, I hope you go out of your way to make this right in the future. Like this needs to be justified and rectified. You can take us out to dinner. You can do something to make this right in the future. But I would say that is the one thing I will definitely take away, in addition to all the great conversations and connections that we had. But yeah, it was a really good
if
trip.
anybody has any suggestions about what they think that could have been, the sandy residue, but it was soft enough. But it was loud
Maybe it's
enough
going
that it
around.
had to have some mass to it.
It
We
was
just need
super
like a
loud, but it was
physicist to
gone.
do an equation.
You didn't see anything on the ground, right?
No, there was nothing.
No.
Like
Yeah.
that's my first thought was like, oh, there's got to be some like a thing bouncing down the road, like you chucked a ice ball or something. And it
Right.
was what in the 40s, so it couldn't have been
No.
a
And there was no
snowfall.
snow anywhere. Yeah, it could have been snow. Anyway, it's a mystery. But with that, Carlton, thank you for spending your time with us up there in Louisville. Thanks for all the work that you did, and hopefully this will be helpful. We should say we're also working on that video about the future of the driving experience, and that's going to be pretty cool. We have some companies like we talked about, like Netrodyne. We have a bunch of other companies that are going to be featured in it, and so that'll be coming in the next month or so. We'll obviously push that out, but yeah. Anything else before we take off?
I think that's it.
All right, we'll catch you guys next week.
Bye.